Anthony Ramos grew up in the neighborhood of Bushwick, Brooklyn, a place full of music, culture, and hardship. His mother worked long hours in medical billing to keep the family afloat, while his father was largely absent. Life wasn't easy, but Anthony learned early on how to find joy even when money was tight. Dinner often consisted of rice, beans, and whatever else they could afford. The family didn't have much, but they had love, they had music, and they had the resilience that poverty often forces into people. From a young age, Anthony understood struggle, but he also understood how to keep going. His first passion was baseball. Like many young boys in the city, he dreamed of becoming a pro athlete. He played for hours in the streets and on local teams, putting all of his energy into the sport. But over time, something began to shift inside him. He stopped showing up to games not because he didn't love baseball anymore, but because something else was calling him. That call wasn't loud or obvious at first. It was quiet, buried in moments when he would sing casually at family gatherings or hum along to music that moved him deeply. He didn't know it yet, but performance storytelling was about to become his life. Anthony's first real taste of performing came during a school musical. He auditioned without fully understanding what he was signing up for. To his surprise, he landed the lead role. Wearing a paper crown and stage makeup, he stepped into the spotlight and felt something click. It wasn't just about applause or attention, it was the feeling of being seen, of expressing something real through art. That night changed everything. From then on, he chased that feeling with the same passion he once gave to baseball. At home, he started singing more often. His voice became a presence at family events. His relatives gave him the nickname Vocal Uncle, proud of the talent they saw growing before their eyes. But singing in the living room was one thing, pursuing it seriously was another. College was expensive, and money was already stretched thin. That's when fate and the right people stepped in. His high school music teacher, a woman who believed in him deeply, encouraged him to apply to the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, AMDBA. The application alone cost $50, money he didn't have, but his teacher wasn't about to let a little thing like that stop him. She paid the fee herself and helped him put together an application. She also told him about the Jerry Seinfeld Scholarship Fund. Anthony applied, pouring his heart into the essay, writing about his struggles, his dreams, and how badly he wanted a shot. He sent it off, unsure of what would come next. Then came the phone call that changed his life. He had not only been accepted to AMDA, but he'd also won the full scholarship. In that moment, Anthony dropped to his knees beside his mother and cried. It wasn't just about school, it was about validation, about opportunity, about finally feeling like the world had opened a door instead of slamming it shut. At AMDA, Anthony found himself surrounded by people who seemed to have been born for the stage. Many had been training since they were kids. They knew directors, had coaches, and came from worlds he couldn't imagine. He felt out of place at first, but he was determined to catch up. He hustled harder than anyone. He took every dance class he could, sometimes teaching in studios just to afford extra training. He learned stage combat, voice projection, character, study anything and everything to build his skill set. He worked part-time jobs, performed in school shows, and refused to quit. After graduation, he joined national tours of well-known musicals like Grease and Damn Yankees. These weren't glamorous gigs. They involved sleeping on buses, performing in unfamiliar cities, and living out of a suitcase. But they were necessary. Every show made him better. Every audience taught him something new. Every challenge reminded him why he started. Eventually, Anthony's hard work paid off in a big way. He landed a role in Lin-Manuel Miranda's In the Heights. And shortly after that, he was cast in the Broadway phenomenon Hamilton. In that show, he played dual roles, John Lawrence and Philip Hamilton, performing 8 shows a week. Often switching between characters in a single night tested him physically and emotionally. But he didn't just survive, he thrived. His performance earned critical acclaim and introduced him to a global audience. But behind the success, Anthony was carrying something heavy. His father, who had been largely absent during his childhood, re-entered his life as an adult. Their relationship was complicated. There were years of distance, hurt, and unanswered questions. But there was also love, a desire to reconnect, and a hunger to understand each other. Slowly they began rebuilding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it meant everything to Anthony. That relationship would later become a central part of his emotional journey, especially during marathon training. By 2025, Anthony had appeared in major movies, launched a music career, and even stepped into the Marvel Universe. On paper, he had everything, but he felt something missing. He wanted a new challenge, something that would test him both physically and mentally. That's when he set his sights on the New York City Marathon. Most people ease into distance running. They start with 5 kiloseconds, then 10 kiloseconds, maybe a half marathon. Not Anthony. He went straight for the big one. He partnered with Brooks Running and began training under the guidance of elite marathoner Day Linden. From the start, he treated training like a sacred ritual: early morning runs, strict diet, gym sessions, discipline on a whole new level. And then, something unexpected happened. As Anthony ran through the streets of Brooklyn, past the corners where he used to play baseball, past the schools where he once sang in talent shows, memories came flooding back. So did emotion. One day, in the middle of a particularly long run, he broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "Yo, Dad, I need you." It wasn't a performance. It wasn't for show. It was raw, honest, and deeply human. That moment became a turning point. Running wasn't just training anymore. It was therapy. Every mile helped him process grief, reconnect with his purpose, and reclaim emotional space. He wasn't just running toward a finish line. He was running toward healing, toward closure, toward the man he was still becoming. In interviews, Anthony would later say that he didn't care about his marathon time. What mattered was the journey, the emotional growth, the physical test, the commitment to something greater than himself. In many ways, his marathon training mirrored his life, full of uphill climbs, moments of doubt, but always moving forward. By the time the marathon approached, Anthony was ready. Not just to run, but to face everything that had led him to that starting line. From the boy who sang at family dinners, to the student who couldn't afford a $50 audition fee, to the Broadway star sobbing mid-run, Anthony Ramos had built a life rooted in perseverance. And that's where his true strength comes from, not from fame, or applause, or celebrity, but from every moment he refused to give up. Every mile he ran, every tear he shed, every time he said, quietly and firmly, "I can do this." This is only the beginning of his marathon story. But it's already clear Anthony isn't just running for himself. He's running for his father, for his past, for everyone who grew up thinking dreams were too expensive. He's running to prove that with heart, discipline, and the courage to feel even the hardest roads can be overcome. There comes a moment in every person's life when the success they've built isn't enough to quiet the voices within. For Anthony Ramos, that moment came quietly. In between film shoots and music recordings, he had reached heights that once felt impossible: Broadway fame, film roles, studio albums, brand partnerships. Yet, somewhere in all of it, he realized he hadn't stopped to breathe. He hadn't given himself the space to confront what was still heavy in his heart. And that's when the idea of running a marathon entered his mind, not as a fitness goal, but as something much deeper. He didn't plan it like a traditional challenge. He didn't look for shortcuts or consult a long list of running tips. He simply felt a pull. Something inside him said, "Go run, see what comes out." And so, with that instinct, he committed to the New York City Marathon. For many, the idea of running 26.2 miles is outrageous. It takes months of training, painful adjustments, mental toughness, and emotional resilience. But for Anthony, this wasn't about proving athleticism. It was about emotional excavation, covering buried grief, reconnecting with his body, and finding out what he was really made of when the cameras weren't rolling. He partnered with Brooks Running, not just for gear or sponsorship, but because he wanted to align himself with people who believed in movement as medicine. Through them, he connected with Coach Day Linden, an Olympian and Boston Marathon champion. Day was calm, direct, and full of wisdom that came from experience, not ego. From day one, she made it clear, this won't just be a physical journey. Be mental, emotional, and spiritual too. Anthony didn't argue. He knew that already. He started training early in the mornings. The city was still asleep, the streets empty, and it was just him, his shoes, and the sound of his own breath. He started with short runs, 3 miles, 5 miles, but even those felt like a test. His legs ached, his lungs burned, but more than that, old memories began to surface. He found himself thinking about his childhood, about moments he hadn't revisited in years. The runs became a mirror, reflecting things he'd pushed away for too long. By the second week, something shifted. Running wasn't just something he was doing, it was something that was doing something to him. Each mile chipped away at his emotional armor. He began to feel raw but also clear, focused, present. During one of his longer training runs, something unexpected happened. About halfway through, he felt an overwhelming wave of sadness. Without thinking, he looked up to the sky and whispered, "Yo, Dad, I need you." The words just came out, as natural as breathing. He hadn't planned them. He didn't even realize he'd been holding them in. But once they were spoken, tears poured down his face. He kept running, even though his body wanted to stop, because in that moment, he wasn't running from something. He was running toward healing. His relationship with his father had always been complicated. There were years of absence, of silence, of pain. And yet, through it all, Anthony had carried hope. A quiet hope that one day they'd reconnect, that one day the distance would close. That hope never fully disappeared, even when the conversations were hard or the time lost felt permanent. On that run, he understood something. Grief doesn't end. It changes shape, but it never vanishes. And sometimes, it needs movement to rise up and be acknowledged. That moment became a turning point in his training. From then on, each run became sacred. Some days he ran with energy, pushing himself to beat personal records. Other days he jogged slowly, letting his thoughts lead the way. But every day, he showed up. He ran through rain, through soreness, through moments when he didn't feel like it, because this was no longer about the finish line. It was about the process, about what he was discovering with each step. That as weeks turned into months, his body began to adapt. He built strength in places he didn't know he had. His breathing became rhythmic, his mind quieter. Running gave him a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. It didn't erase the chaos of the outside world, but it gave him an anchor, a routine, a way to come back to himself. His coach, Day, continued to guide him gently but firmly. She didn't overwhelm him with technical jargon. Instead, she asked him one question over and over again. Why are you doing this? And each time he answered, the words got clearer. Because I need to face myself. Because I want to know I can finish what I start. Because I'm tired of running from my emotions. I want to run through them. Those words shaped his training. They shaped his mindset. And slowly, he began to realize that the marathon wasn't just one race. It was every moment he had chosen to keep going, even when things were hard. It was every time he stood on stage, despite fear. Every time he forgave when it was easier to hold a grudge. Every time he loved even though it hurt. That there were setbacks along the way. A pulled muscle, a week when he got sick. A few days where his mental health dipped, and he questioned everything. But he didn't quit. He adjusted. He rested. He reminded himself that progress wasn't linear and healing didn't come with a schedule. One of the most powerful things he did during training was journaling. After every run, he wrote down what he felt, not just physically, but emotionally. Some entries were filled with gratitude, others were full of pain. Some simply said, I showed up today. But each word was honest. And that honesty became another kind of training, a way to strengthen the soul alongside the body. He also started talking more openly to friends and family. He shared what the marathon meant to him, not as a bucket list item, but as a rite of passage. People listened. Some were surprised, others were moved. His vulnerability inspired others to open up to him, and in that connection, he felt less alone. Anthony began to realize that the marathon was never meant to be a solo act. It was about community, about shared struggle, about running beside people who also carried invisible burdens and still chose to keep moving. That sense of unity fueled him. On weekends, he'd run through different neighborhoods, some familiar, some new. Each block told a story. The pizza shop where he used to hang out as a teen, the corner where he'd wait for the bus to auditions, the park bench where he once sat and cried after a rough day on set. And now, those places were part of his healing. With every step, he was reclaiming ground, not just physically, but emotionally. As the marathon day approached, Anthony's nerves began to build. It wasn't fear of failure. It was the weight of everything this race symbolized. For him, crossing that finish line wasn't just about endurance. It was about closure. About proving to himself that he could carry his past without letting it define his future. The night before the marathon, he barely slept. His mind was racing. He thought about his father, about his mother's sacrifices, about the teacher who paid for his college audition, about the millions of people who never got their second chance, and he promised himself that no matter how hard it got, he wouldn't stop. When the morning came, he laced up his shoes with shaking hands. The city buzzed with energy. Thousands of runners lined up, each carrying their own story. As the starting horn echoed through the streets, Anthony took his first step and everything else faded away. The crowd cheered, but he didn't hear it. He was in his zone, one foot in front of the other, breath after breath, mile after mile. His muscles screamed, his heart pounded, but he kept going. Around mile 14, he hit a wall mentally and physically. Doubts crept in, his legs felt like concrete. But then he remembered that day during training, the one where he cried out to his father. He remembered why he started, and that memory gave him strength. He pushed through, Slowly, the pain became rhythm, the exhaustion became focus. And then, as he rounded the final stretch, something incredible happened. A wave of emotion rose inside him, not sadness, not fear, but joy, pure, overwhelming joy. He could see the finish line, and with every fiber of his being, he sprinted toward it. When he crossed it, he didn't raise his arms or jump in celebration. He just stopped, placed his hands on his knees, and let the tears fall. Not just for the race, but for everything that had led him there, every mile of grief, every memory of pain, every choice to keep going. In that moment, Anthony Ramos wasn't just a runner. He was a survivor, a son, an artist, a man who had faced himself and won. Anthony had crossed the finish line, but something inside him told him the journey wasn't over. Yes, the physical race was done. His legs had carried him across 26.2 miles of New York pavement, through neighborhoods full of history, pain, and joy. But what came next was something few ever talk about: the aftermath, the silence after the storm, the reckoning that follows victory. He had run to face his past, to honor his father, to reconnect with the boy inside him who once dreamed in silence. But now, he stood still. The world was cheering, but inside, Anthony felt something else, something quieter, heavier, and more honest than ever before. He didn't celebrate the way most runners did. No raised fists, no victory pose. Instead, he walked slowly toward the sidelines, where his mother was waiting. She didn't say anything at first. She just opened her arms, and he collapsed into her hug. For a moment, they didn't speak. Number 2. Need. The years of struggle, the memories of crowded apartments and unpaid bill. The nights spent crying behind locked bathroom doors, they all washed over them in that one embrace. He whispered thank you into her shoulder, and she whispered back, "You've always been enough." That sentence echoed in his soul for days. Back home, the medal lay on the table, untouched. His running shoes, still marked by sweat and city dust, sat near the door. He didn't rush to post on social media. He didn't rush to book interviews. For the first time in years, Anthony allowed himself to just be still. Stillness, he realized, was its own kind of marathon. In the weeks that followed, he went through a strange kind of withdrawal. He missed the early morning runs. He missed the mental clarity that came after 10 miles. He missed the pain, even the way it reminded him he was alive. Without that daily ritual, he felt something unraveling inside him, but he didn't ignore it. He leaned into it. He began walking more, not running, just walking. Through the same streets, past the same parks. Only now he didn't have a timer, no goal, no finish line. He let the city move around him while he stayed grounded. And slowly a new kind of clarity emerged. He wasn't just recovering from a marathon, he was evolving, transforming, becoming someone new. One day, he sat in his studio, staring at a blank notebook. The urge to write came slowly, like fog lifting. He picked up a pen and began writing, not lyrics, not scripts, just feelings. He wrote about his father, about that run, when he broke down and whispered to the sky. He wrote about shame, about pride, about forgiveness. He wrote until his hand ached, and the pages curled from ink. He didn't know what he would do with the words. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but for now, writing was his way of running. People began reaching out, fans, strangers, other artists saying they had watched his journey and felt seen. Some admitted they were dealing with grief they hadn't touched in years. Others said they were finally lacing up running shoes, not to race, but to heal. Anthony read each message carefully. He responded when he could, and each time, he thought, maybe this is what it was all for. He began working on new music, songs that weren't just about love or fame, but about identity, about being Puerto Rican in a world that tries to put you in boxes, about growing up poor and still dreaming big, about losing your father, then finding him again in your own reflection. The marathon had opened a door, and Anthony had walked through it. He began speaking at schools, at community centers, not as a celebrity, but as a kid from Bushwick who had a story to tell. He told them about failing, about quitting baseball, about not fitting in at acting school, but he also told them about grit, about showing up, about choosing vulnerability over bravado. He said, "Don't run from your emotions, run with them." That became his motto, and people listened. One night he stood on stage at a small event in Brooklyn, no lights, no cameras, just a mic and a room full of young artists. He told the story of the marathon not with polished lines or rehearsed quotes, but with raw honesty. He talked about how he thought he'd find peace at the finish line, but the truth was, peace came later. It came in the quiet, in the process. In every step where he chose not to numb the pain, but to feel it, to honor it. He looked out at the crowd and said, "Sometimes we think the goal is to win, but really, the goal is to keep going. That's what life is, just not stopping." That line stuck with people. It was repeated in articles, quoted on podcasts, turned into a graphic and shared thousands of times. But for Anthony, it wasn't meant to be viral, it was just the truth. Over time, he started running again, not training, just running for the love of it. On those runs, he no longer cried. He smiled. He let the wind hit his face and remembered the boy who once felt invisible, now standing in his full power. He no longer ran to escape. He ran because he could, because he wanted to, because every mile was a gift. He visited his father's grave one afternoon. It wasn't planned. He was passing by the cemetery after a run, and something told him to stop. He stood there for a long time, saying nothing, just breathing, just remembering. Then finally, he whispered, "I did it, and I'm still doing it." He smiled. For the first time in a long time, that smile reached his eyes. The truth is, marathons don't end at the finish line. They end in moments like that, in the quiet courage it takes to forgive, in the daily decision to keep healing, in the strength it takes to say, "I'm still growing." Anthony Ramos's marathon wasn't just a race. It was a declaration, a journey back to self, a reminder to everyone watching that it's okay to feel lost, to break down, to cry in the middle of the street. What matters is that you keep going, that you lace up your shoes emotionally, spiritually, and take that next step. Because the real finish line, it's choosing to show up for your life, over and over again.